I have signed my name to a great many documents in 40 years of liaison work, and until the Sarn verge, I believed a signature was a small thing, a mark of process, a line at the bottom of a page that said the talking was finished and the shooting would stop. I no longer believe that. I believe now that a signature is a promise a person makes with their whole life behind it, and that when the promise is broken, the life behind it is owed an answer. I learned this at 58 years of age, over a bright yellow world called Sarn, and I have spent every day since carrying what I learned. Let me tell it plainly, the way I have had to learn to tell it, because the plain telling is the only one that does not shake. The war with the Keithon Accord had run 11 years by then. It was not the largest war Earth had fought, but it was the coldest. The Keithon were a peer state, not raiders, not zealots, not a decaying empire feeding on its own edges, but a disciplined, ancient, methodical people who had built forge worlds across a whole spiral arm and armed them with the patience of a species that thought in centuries. They fought us the way a stonecutter works a block, without heat, without waste, taking the long lines. In 11 years, neither side had broken the other. We had learned to respect them the way you respect a hard winter. I was the one who arranged the ceasefire. That is not a boast. It is the fact I have to live inside. The talks ran 9 weeks at a neutral station in the Sarn Verge. A bright glass-domed ring hung in daylight over the yellow planet, sunlight pouring through the panels so hard we kept the shades half-drawn during sessions. I sat across a long, pale table from a Keithon envoy named Sethizvor, a tall gray figure with a voice like a slow bell, and we built the thing line by line. A full ceasefire, a staged withdrawal, and as the first act of good faith, a corridor. The corridor was mine. I proposed it, I drew it, I argued it through 3 days of objection. Earth had tens of thousands of civilians trapped on the border colonies the fighting had cut off, wounded who could not be treated, families who had been living underground for a year, orphaned children whose worlds had been evacuated around them until there was no one left but the children and the people minding them. I proposed a single guaranteed lane through the contested space. 40 hours. Safe passage for medical and evacuation traffic only, unarmed, running under a recognized banner. The Keithon would hold their fire, we would hold ours, and the corridor would carry the helpless out. Sethizvor considered it for a long time. Then he asked me a question I did not understand until much later. "You wish us to guarantee the passage of those who cannot compel it," he said. "Yes," I said, "that is what a corridor is." He was quiet, and then he made the gesture the Keithon make when they have decided to indulge something they do not respect. And he signed, and I countersigned, my own hand, my own name, Editorn, Liaison, on behalf of Earth and everyone it was trying to carry home. The sunlight came through the dome and fell across both our signatures at once. I remember thinking it was the best work I had ever done. The corridor opened at the 40th hour after signing. The evacuation flotilla went in hospital tenders, cargo haulers stripped and refitted for passengers, and at the head of it the care ship Aloan, a broad white slow vessel that had been built as a colony seed ship and converted in this war into the thing that carried the ones who could not carry themselves. She flew the banner large on her flank, the plain blue and white passage sign, lit so it could be read at range. She carried 9,400 souls. Most of them were wounded. A great many of them were children whose colonies no longer existed. I watched her go in from the station. I want to be precise about this because it is the part I cannot put down. She entered the corridor exactly as agreed on the marked lane at the marked speed, broadcasting the marked signal 22 hours into a 40-hour guarantee that I had drawn and both sides had sworn. There was no ambiguity. There was no provocation. There was nothing for anyone to misread. The Keithon fired on her at the 24th hour. They did it well, which is the thing about them I have never been able to forgive and have never been able to unsee. They did it the way they did everything, without heat, cleanly, from a standing picket that had been in position the whole time, holding, patient, waiting. They put 4 accurate strikes into the Aloan, and she came apart in the daylight over Sarn, in the lane, under the banner, and the smaller ships around her scattered, and most of them did not make it out either. It was over in under a minute. 9,400 souls, and the corridor I drew, and my name on the page. I was still on the station. I heard it come in over the corridor channel, not screaming. The Aloan did not have time to scream, but the small, cold flotillanet traffic, the escort tender captains calling contact and then calling nothing. I stood at the glass with the yellow world bright below, and I watched the debris field bloom in the sunlight, a slow silver flowering where a white ship had been, and I did not understand it. That is the truth. For a long moment, I simply did not understand what I was looking at, because it could not be what it was. I found Ceasefire on the station. He had not left. That too I have had to sit with, that he was still there, calm, unhurried, that he had known and had stayed. I asked him the only word I could form. I asked him why. He did not pretend confusion. The Keithun do not lie the way we do. They find it inefficient. He looked at me with those gray, patient eyes, and he told me. And what he told me is the center of everything that came after. So I will give it to you exactly as he gave it to me. The banner protects nothing, he said. It never did. A mark of passage is only as real as the force that stands behind it. Your wounded flew under a sign and asked the sign to keep them. But a sign cannot keep anyone. Only strength keeps. You offered us a corridor of the weak and asked us to honor it because you had drawn it. We honored nothing because there was nothing there to honor. There was only weakness flying openly, believing itself safe. He paused. We have taught you a true thing today. Protection is not a promise. It is a capability. Those who cannot compel their own safety were never safe. You have been laboring under a kindness that does not exist. Now you know. I have replayed that speech more times than I can count. What I understood standing there was that he was not gloating. He believed it. To the Keithun it was not a betrayal at all, it was a correction. In their long, cold reasoning. A flag of protection extended to those who could not enforce it was a category error, a fiction the weak told themselves, and firing on the Aloan was simply the universe declining to honor a fiction. They had signed the corridor the way you sign to indulge a child. And when the child stepped out into the road did what roads do. I did not answer him. There was no answer I could make from where I stood. I turned and I went to my quarters and I sat with my name on that page for a long time, and I want to tell you I wept, but I did not. I have thought about why. I think it was because weeping was a thing you did over a loss you could not affect, and even then, before I knew what would come, some part of me had already understood that this was not that kind of loss. This was a debt, and a debt is not wept over. A debt is paid. I sent my report to Earth that night. I did not editorialize. I did not have to. I transcribed Ceasfire's words exactly, because I understood even then that his words were the important part, that Earth needed to hear not just what the Keithun had done, but why, in their own reasoning, they had done it, because the why was the thing that could not be allowed to stand. I sent the corridor documents, both signatures, the sworn terms. I sent the Aloan's manifest, all 9,400 names, because I would not let them be a number. Then I waited. I did not know, when I sent it, what Earth had been holding. Here is the thing about the war with the Keithun that I had understood only as a fact and not yet as a meaning. Earth had not been fighting that war with its full hand. We had been fighting it with an arm. A large arm, but an arm, and behind the arm, in the deep yards out past the belt, Earth had for a century maintained something it did not use. It had a name in the budgets and the treaties, and it was spoken of the way you speak of a thing you hope never to need. It was called the surety. The surety was not a secret weapon. I want to be careful about that, because the word secret is wrong and the word weapon is too small. It was a standing fleet, 1,180 capital hulls, and the tenders and the yards and the crews to run them, that Earth had built and maintained for 100 years for exactly one purpose. It was the force that stood behind Earth's word. When Earth signed a thing, when Earth guaranteed a corridor or a border or a people's continued existence, the surety was what the guarantee meant. It was the strength behind the sign. and for 100 years Earth had kept it in the deep yards and had never used it, because the entire point of the surety was that it never had to be used. Its existence was the guarantee. Its restraint was the mercy. We had held it back through 11 years of the Keithon War. Do you understand what that means? We had fought the Accord with a fraction of what we had, and taken our losses and held the line, and never once let the surety off its leash. Because to use it was to say that Earth's word had failed, that talking was over, that the thing behind the sign had to come out and be seen. Earth had spent a century hopping never to have to prove that the guarantee was real. Restraint was the whole doctrine. We carried the surety the way you carry, a thing you pray you never draw. The Elohim was the drawing. I did not learn the decision was made from a message. I learned it because they came for me. 3 weeks after Sarn, a courier put in at the station, and a surety officer walked into my quarters, a spare gray-haired man named Halloran who wore the fleet's mark on his collar, and I saw the mark and I understood before he spoke. The mark was a plain blue faceplate, a featureless visor, no eyes, no mouth, the color of the passage banner. It is the oldest mark in Earth's service and the least explained, and every child knows it without being told what it means. It means the thing that stands between you and harm. It means the face you will not see coming if you are the harm. The surety had worn it for 100 years in the deep yards, and it had never once come out into the light. Halloran said, "Liaison torn. You drew the corridor and you signed the guarantee. The fleet requests that you ride with it." I asked what the fleet intended to do. He looked at me a moment, and there was nothing in his face that I would call anger, and nothing I would call satisfaction. There was only the flat certainty of a man carrying an order he had waited his whole career not to receive. "We intend," he said, "to make the banner real." I want to be honest about the shape of what came next, because there are people who tell this kind of story wrong. They tell it as fury. They tell it as a great cry of rage, a berserk fleet screaming down out of the dark to burn everything it can reach. That is not what the surety was, and it is not what I saw. If it had been rage, it would have been smaller. Rage burns hot and burns out. What I rode with was colder than that and far more terrible, because it did not burn out. It did not burn at all, it proceeded. The surety came out of the deep yards in a single week, 1,180 hulls in ordered formation, and the tenders behind them, and it moved on the Keithon Accord not as a raid but as a campaign, the way you take apart a machine when you have decided the machine must never run again. There was a plan. There was always a plan. Earth had drawn the plan 100 years before against the day it might be needed, and had updated it every year, and had prayed every year to shelve it again. The plan was not to punish the Keithon. Punishment is a thing you do to change behavior. The plan was to remove the Keithon war state from existence, forge world by forge world, because a state that had reasoned its way to the Elohim could not be permitted to keep the capability to reason its way there again. I rode on the flag, a wedge-hulled ship called the Surety of Ren, and Halloran gave me a station on the bridge and a task. My task was to keep the record, not the tactical record. The fleet kept that. My task was the ledger. I was to log world by world what had been demanded, what had been offered, what had been given, and what remained. I understood why they wanted me for it. I was the one who had signed the corridor. I was the one whose guarantee had been thrown back in her face over Sarn. If the guarantee was to be made real, the person who had made it needed to be the one who watched it become real, and set it down, so that no one could ever say afterward that it had been done in the dark. The first forge world was called Ithki. It was a gray armored planet, ringed with yards, and it made the picket ships that had held station over the corridor. We came into its system in daylight, the yellow sun of Ithki glaring off 1,180 hulls, and the Keithon defense fleet came up to meet us in good order, patient and cold, as they always were, and the surety took it apart. I will not pretend the Keithon were not skilled. They were the finest cold-fighting people I have known, and they died the way they had lived, in order, without panic, giving nothing away. But skill is a thing you bring to a contest, and the surety did not offer a contest. It offered arithmetic. 1,180 hulls, a century of doctrine, a plan drawn against exactly this, and behind all of it the thing the Kethun had never once had to fight, an enemy with no restraint left. For 100 years the surety's restraint had been its meaning. Now the restraint was gone, and what was left was pure capability applied without mercy and without haste, and the Kethun defense of evacuee, which would have held for a month against the arm we had been fighting them with, held for a day and a half against the whole of it. And then Halloran did the thing that told me, finally, what kind of war this was going to be. He opened a channel to evacuee, and he offered the living a passage out. I logged it. Every living Kethun on evacuee, the crews of the yards, the families in the underworks, the workers who made the picket ships, was offered a corridor off the world before the forges came down. A real corridor guaranteed, held open by the surety's own guns, marked and sworn. And here is the part I have never been able to explain to people who were not there. Earth held that corridor. Perfectly. Not one Kethun who took it was harmed. The surety, which had come to unmake their war state to the last bolt, opened a safe passage for their living and kept it, absolutely. Because the entire point of everything we were doing was that a corridor Earth swore was a corridor that held. That was the message. Not the fire was only the instrument. The message was the two corridors, laid side by side for the whole galaxy to read. The Kethun had been offered a corridor for the weak and had fired on it, because they believed protection was a fiction the weak told themselves. And Earth had answered by proving the fiction was real by holding, over an enemy's own children, the exact guarantee that the enemy had refused to hold over ours. We did not fire on the ones who fled evacuee. We could have. There was no force left to stop us. We held the corridor because holding the corridor was the whole argument. The strength was there. The banner meant something. And what it meant was, this holds even when it costs us nothing to break it, because that is what a promise is. Then we brought the forges down, not the living, the capability. Every yard, every foundry, every picket line and armory, and the deep pattern vaults where the Kethun kept 1,000 years of weapons craft. The surety ground it all to cold iron over 4 methodical days in daylight without haste, and evacuee that had been a forge world was a dead gray world with its living carried off and its war unmade forever. I logged it, demanded the end of the capability, offered the lives, given both. Remaining 40 more worlds. 40 more worlds. I'm not going to walk you through all 41, because they were, in the terrible way of the surety, the same. That was the thing about it that broke something in the Kethun that I do not think has healed. They were used to war as a contest of skill, a long, cold game between peers, and the surety refused to play it as a game. It came to each world the same way, in overwhelming order in daylight, offering the living a guaranteed corridor, and then unmaking the capability without heat and without pause. There was no cleverness to fight against. There was no rage to wait out. There was only the arithmetic and the doctrine and the terrible held corridors, world after world, the surety carrying the enemy's own helpless to safety with one hand while it ended the enemy's ability to make war with the other, and the two things never contradicting, because to the surety they were the same thing. Both were the banner made real. Both were the answer to Sarn. The Kethun tried on the 9th world to fight it as if it were rage. They sent an envoy under a flag, under a banner, to sue for terms, and I think they expected that we would either honor the banner and negotiate, or dishonor it and prove ourselves no better than they had been over the Aloan. They had reasoned it as a trap. If we fired on their flag, we lost the argument. If we honored it, they lived. We honored it. Of course we honored it. We honored the banner absolutely. The envoy came and went in perfect safety, guaranteed, untouched, because we would never again let it be said that Earth broke a sign. And then, having honored the banner, we told the envoy the truth, which was that the banner had never been the thing in question. The Kethun could fly every flag they owned, and every one of them would be honored down to the letter, and it would not save a single forge, because the forges were not being taken as an act of war that a truce could end. They were being taken as a correction that could not be reasoned with, because the Kethun had proven, over Sarn, that they could not be reasoned with, that they had reasoned their way to firing on 9,400 wounded and called it a lesson. You do not negotiate with a state that has demonstrated it will honor no protection it is not forced to honor. You remove its capacity to make the demonstration ever again. And you do it while honoring every flag it flies, so that the whole galaxy understands the difference between us and them is not that we are softer. It is that our word is iron. The envoy went back to the ninth world with nothing, and the ninth world came down, and its living went out through a held corridor, and I logged it. There was a night. I use the word loosely. The surety kept a clock, but the void keeps none, somewhere around the 20th world, when I could not stay on the bridge, and I went down to the observation gallery on the surety of Ren and stood at the glass. Below us a Kethun world turned in the daylight of its sun, and across its northern face the forges were coming down in long, slow, silent flowers of light, and out past the terminator the corridor stood open, a lane of surety hulls holding station, so that a stream of Kethun evacuation craft could thread between them and away. I stood there and watched the two things at once, the unmaking and the mercy, side by side, the way they always were, and Halloran came and stood beside me and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "You're troubled." I told him the truth. I told him I had drawn a corridor once for the weak, and it had gotten 9,400 people killed. And now I was watching us draw corridors for the enemy's weak and hold them perfectly, and I could not make the two facts sit together in my chest. He watched the light on the world below for a time. Then he said, "The corridor you drew wasn't wrong, Torn. It was never wrong. The corridor was right. The thing that was missing wasn't the corridor, it was us. It was the force behind the sign." He nodded down at the lane of hulls holding station over the enemy world. "That's what you're looking at. That's the corridor you drew, finally standing up. It just took 100 years and 1,100 hulls to make it real." I have thought about that more than almost anything anyone has ever said to me, because it was true and it was terrible, and both at once. The corridor had never been the mistake. The mistake had been believing a corridor could hold itself. A promise is only as real as the force behind it, Seth Isvor had said it to gloat, and it was the truest thing anyone said to me in that whole war, and the surety was Earth's answer to it. Not to deny it, to agree with it completely, and then to become the force. You say a banner protects nothing without strength behind it. Very well. Here is the strength. Here is what it looks like when Earth's word has an arm. It carries your children to safety through the ruins of your own war, and it does not miss, and it does not break, and it does not stop. And when it is finished, the whole galaxy will know that when Earth draws a corridor, the corridor holds, because 1,100 hulls came out of 100 years of silence to make it hold. The Kethun war state ended at the 41st world 9 months after Sarn. I want to be honest about that number too, because people expect it to have been a single terrible day, and it was not. It was 9 months. It was slow. That was the most frightening thing about it, and the most deliberate. A single terrible day is rage. 9 methodical months is a decision. Earth had decided, and Earth did not hurry, and it did not tire, and it did not stop until the thing was finished. Until there was not one forge world, one pattern vault, one picket line left to the accord, and the Kethun who had made war on a spiral arm for 1,000 years could not have built a warship if they had wanted to. And their living, all of them, everyone who had taken a corridor, were alive. The last world was called Sarnki, and it was where the Sathrine sat, the council of first voices that governed the accord. By the time we came to it, there was nothing left to defend it with. The 40 forge worlds were cold iron. The picket fleets were gone. Sarnki came up under a banner, every banner it had, and we honored all of them, and the surety put in over the capital in daylight, 1,100 hulls hanging bright in the yellow sky, and I was told to prepare to go down. Halloran said the fleet had one more corridor to hold and one more thing to deliver, and that the person who delivered it should be the person who had signed the first one. He meant me. He had always meant me. That was why I was there. I went down to Sarn Key in a single tender, under a passage banner, held by the whole of the surety, and not one hand was raised against me. because the banner was real now and everyone in that sky knew it. I walked into the Sathrine's hall, a great daylit vault of pale stone with the sun pouring through high windows, and the surviving first voices were there, and at their head was Sethai's Vor. I had not known he was Sathrine. I had thought him only an envoy. But he was first voice, the one who had signed the corridor over Sarn, the one who had told me the banner protects nothing. And now he sat at the head of a broken state in a hall full of daylight and watched me walk in with my ledger under my arm, and I understood that this was why they had sent me. Full circle. The two of us who had signed, meeting again, with everything that had happened between our two signatures laid out across a spiral arm in cold iron. He looked older, though I do not know if the Keithun aged the way we do. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, and his voice was still the slow bell it had always been, "You have unmade 1,000 years." "Yes," I said. "You held corridors for our living while you did it." "Yes." "Every one of them held." "Yes," I said, "every one." He was quiet, and then he asked the question that I had come to answer, though I do not think he knew he was asking it. He said, "What did you come to demand of us?" And here is where the tellers get it wrong, the ones who were not there. They expect that I threw his own speech back at him, that I stood over a broken enemy and said something cutting, something clever, made him hear his own words about the banner and the weak. I did not. There was no cleverness in me, and there was no cruelty either. There was only the ledger, and the thing Earth had sent me to deliver, and I delivered it the way you deliver a verdict, without heat, because heat was never what any of this was. I opened the ledger. I did not read the 41 worlds. I read one line. I read the manifest of the careship Eloan, the first name on it, a child's name, and I read it into the daylit hall, and then I closed the book. "I came to demand nothing," I said. "There is nothing left to demand. Your war state is ended. Your capability is gone. We are not here to take anything more from you because we have already taken the only thing we came for, which was the ability to ever again do to anyone what you did over Sarn." Sethai's Vor watched me. "But Earth sent one term," I said, "and I was chosen to deliver it because I signed the corridor you burned, and Earth felt the corridor should have the last word. So here is the term. It is not a demand on you. It is a fact about the galaxy now, and you are the first to be told it." I set my hand flat on the closed ledger. "From this day," I said, "the banner is real, everywhere, for everyone. Every corridor drawn for the weak, every sign of passage, every flag of protection flown by anyone who cannot compel their own safety it holds. Not because it is honored, because it is enforced. The surety does not go back into the deep yards. It stays out in the light, and it stands behind every sign forever, and any state that fires on a banner because it believes the banner protects nothing will learn, the way you learned, that it was wrong. You told me protection was not a promise but a capability. You were right, so we became the capability. That is the term. The weak are safe now, all of them, everywhere, because we made it so, and we will keep making it so, and there is no arithmetic left in the galaxy that can change it." He was silent for a long time in the daylit hall, and then Sethai's Vor, first voice of the Keithun, who had signed a corridor to indulge a child and had fired on it to teach a lesson, bowed his gray head, and I understood that he had finally learned the true thing, the one he had thought he was teaching me over the debris of the Eloan. I went back up to the surety of Ren, and I gave Halloran the ledger, and I told him it was done. He asked me how I felt. I told him the truth, which was the only thing I had left by then. I told him that for 40 hours I had guaranteed a corridor with nothing behind it but my name, and that I had been wrong to think my name was enough, and that I would carry those 9,400 to the end of my life, but that I had learned what a signature is. It is a promise a person makes with their whole life behind it. And that Earth had taken my broken promise and put 1,100 hulls behind it, and held it up over a spiral arm, and made it true, so that no child flying under a banner would ever again be told the banner meant nothing. The surety did not go back into the deep yards. It is out there still in the light, wearing the blue faceplate, standing behind every corridor drawn for the ones who cannot hold their own. I signed a great many documents after Sarn. I never again believed a signature was a small thing. And when I sign one now, I know what stands behind it. I have seen it come out of 100 years of silence. I have watched it hold a corridor over an enemy's children while it unmade the enemy's war. I have learned the one thing the Keithun learned too late, in a daylit hall, with a closed book between us. The banner is only as real as the force behind it. So we became the force.